the narrative that we're being spun surrounding Nigel Farage is that essentially Reform is Nigel Farage. Without Nigel Farage, Reform collapses into the dust and is nothing. And if it wasn't for Nigel Farage's kindly grace to come back from the boomer heaven of sitting around on your own GB News show, Reform would have nothing and there'd be nowhere in the polls. And if, therefore, Nigel Farage were to relinquish control of Reform, possibly have an internal election amongst the membership, and someone else were to win, well, then it'd be over for Reform and they could go nowhere ever again. Now, I'm not sure that's true.
Well, I mean, it kind of is true because he's assassinated so many up-and-comers that it literally is just him.
In a very literal sense, yes, it's only Farage because he has shot everyone else, right?
Yes.
Soviet style. But in the sort of hypothetical, well, the narrative of, oh, well, it's only Farage who can win because he's the one with the clout and things like this. It's like, well, I don't know if that's true, and I think that we can actually dig into a few statistics to see it. So here is Statista's voting intentions from July 2017 to 2050. Now, I should be able to zoom in a bit closer. There we go. Right. So Nigel Farage took over the Reform Party in, I think it was June or July 2024, when they were on 17%. Now, this is not an insignificant number at all. And this is without Nigel Farage backing them. And in fact, it was the poll in Clacton that had Reform at about 35% that made him come down, pluck whoever was the guy, I don't even know who the guy was, throw them under the bus mercilessly and install himself into Clacton. Yep. So it wasn't that Nigel Farage had been in the constituency campaigning vigorously and got the number up. No,
it's turned up.
This was happening on its own, and Nigel Farage jumped on the bandwagon and has seen it continue.
The original candidate who actually became the first, whatever it was, Brexit Party MEP was Douglas Carswell.
That's correct.
He had already been thrown under the bus about 5-6 years earlier at this point, so it would have been some other underling.
And Douglas Carswell was the only UKIP MP and the only one who he won a by-election in Clacton. Yep. So if anything, Douglas Carswell had seeded the ground for him by making it quite a UKIP-y area, and of course Farage being a continuity of UKIP. And you can even see that the month after Farage takes the helm, they actually go down slightly, but then they start going up. But the thing is, this is in tandem with Keir Starmer screwing everything up. So it's one of those things where it's like, right, so if Nigel Farage hadn't jumped on, why would we believe that Labour and Reform wouldn't have gone like this anyway?
Can I say two quick things on this? So
yes,
with Clacton as well, part of the reason that Farage chose Clacton was because there was some onward research, I think it was a year before last, where they polled the entire country and found that 9 in 10 constituencies wanted to reduce migration, and that's when they were estimating that net migration was 70,000 rather than 700,000. And the strongest feeling for reducing migration was Clacton. So that they knew that was the most winnable constituency even still. Clacton. And last outpost of the Anglo-Saxons, I'm sure. And then the other reason that it dipped as well during the election, and it's not that I disagree with Farage on this stance, but it is unpopular in the UK, is that Farage did the Nick Robinson interview on the BBC, and he said that we provoked the Ukraine war. And even if you want to say that he had a nuanced reading of NATO expansion, for example, the way that he phrased it did cause them to take a dip in the polls for at least a week or two. And so it could be plausibly argued that Farage, while he made obvious gains since coming back, the announcement was widely covered by press outlets, and he has a larger TikTok following than any of the other MPs, etc., he did also cause his fair share of controversy as soon as he came back as leader before he was elected as an MP, which did impact the poll numbers as well.
So that's a great point, and I'm very glad you raised it, because again, I'm not convinced that this rise to the current sort of 25% roughly in the polls is just down to Farage. If anything, it could be Farage's legend is in fact masking what has really happened. Because I think actually, after the Southport riots and after people have seen how, frankly, Labour are and how the Conservatives are, which is completely unimpressive on both counts, and Labour evil, Tories effing useless, I think that this would have been something that could have happened under Richard Tice.
I mean, Starmer outed himself as a soulless robot who
Yeah.
basically attacked
He hates
people
the country.
who think that little girls getting murdered is a bad thing.
Yes.
And the Conservatives appointed a literal first-generation Nigerian as their leader.
Yes.
You know, I think that the Conservatives and Labour Party have been doing the heavy lifting here.
Exactly. And so actually Reform's position in the polls here is it's not self-evident at all that it is Nigel Farage that has done this. If anything, Farage could be standing in the way of what has actually happened, as in, you know, blocking the light, as it were. And we don't know that Farage isn't himself acting as a cap on reform, because Keir Starmer could not be less popular. Kemi Badenoch is not popular, and nobody even wants to talk about the Conservatives anymore. And so it's not clear that the Reform Party couldn't be 10 points higher. And it might be actually that Farage is the hard cap of 25%. We don't know, because Farage is never going to relinquish control. So sorry, go on.
I think that Farage needn't be a hard cap in the same way that Donald Trump needn't have been a hard cap when he came back and took over the Republican Party, because some people thought that Donald Trump was too toxic a figure, that he was a convicted felon, that because of January the 6th, people wouldn't vote for him. But by amassing the All-Star Coalition, he broadened out his voter base. Yeah. Now, Farage has got a consolidated support ceiling, let's say 15-20%. If he brought on former members of the Brexit Party, let's say that he appointed Alex Phillips, the women's spokesperson, the immigration spokesperson, even, let's say he brought Belinda Lucy back, let's say he took the stone out of his shoe and brought Ben Habib back into the fold. Let's say that he had taken initiative and gone down to Clarkson's farm during the farming protest rather than allow Kemi Badenoch to do that, for example. Let's say he had Gen Z spokesman, a bit like Jordan Bardella in France. He would snap up all of these additional voting constituencies if only he would delegate responsibilities, not necessarily power, but trust and authority down the chain to other people who could credibly line themselves up as successors, or at least support staff. And he hasn't done that. So it could be that Farage is the hard cap, not because he himself is unpopular, but because he is culling other talent that would pick up other voting constituencies from coming up through the ranks.
Yeah, I think you're exactly on the point there. I think that Farage's hard cap is about 20%, just him personally. But you're exactly right. What he should have is a coalition of people around him who are sort of like cap raisers, who get a couple of extra percent themselves. And so if you get 10 of these, then you've got another 10 or 20 extra percent potential that you can get.
RFK was a great example of that. He went over to Trump, and he was probably worth a point or two just by himself.
Oh, he's 4%.
4%, okay. Yeah.
So that's the 4% that's gone straight over to Trump.
Yep.
So you're exactly right on that, Connor.
I mean, they could do that in this country as well. I mean, they could. I mean, he's controversial, but they could take on a Tommy. He's probably worth 5 points by himself at least, and then you could balance it off by having somebody a little bit more boring on the other side, and you could build a coalition of a whole bunch of these people.
It should be a big tent, just everyone.
Instead, he's got an aggressively small tent, which basically seems to be him, Richard Tice, Tice's spiteful wino wife, and this Muslim chairman who's just turned up.
No, they've got an army of automatons as well.
Well, yeah, and a few Zoomers bumbling around the outside of the tent, yeah.
I think, unfortunately, as well, to throw in the mix, is because our political climate in Britain is quite vastly different to the Americans as well, unfortunately. I think it's mainly because of tabloid journalism as well, media frameworks, and just caring too much about what the opposition thinks. And I think that flatlines Farage's willingness to, of course, wanting to open up that cap and to assign different people to boost the points. I think
he never learned Trump's key lesson. Trump's key lesson was, I am not going to be dictated to by the media. I am going to put out my line, and I'm going to make it popular, and then the media can either back me or not, and then you can split along those lines. Farage is still chasing the Guardian headlines.
Exactly. And to add, we've seen that Elon Musk has come out and said, if low,
we might
potentially,
be coming to that, I think.
Yeah? I'll wait for
we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, Matt has left a great comment here. The whole Niger secretly based thing is our version of QAnon, utter cunt.
Yes.
Harry, can I get your opinion on that?
Oh, it's absolutely true. In fact, actually, that's a great segue into something that I was wanting to say anyway, which is, even if none of this had happened, even if 2029 came through and Reform get an absolute majority of parliamentary seats, Nigel is not our guy, and he was not going to enact the kind of changes that we would hope for. I know that Reform had put forward their promise, their contract to their members, saying they would stop the boats. He's got no plan to do that, saying that they would get rid of foreign criminals. He's explicitly said that that's impossible, and saying that we're going to manage migration. Yeah, but that's a net zero promise, which just means that the rate of replacement is slightly slower. He wasn't going to do any of this. I just went back and looked at an old 2015 article when he was in the run-up to Brexit, and he was saying about how, he would prefer Indian migrants into the country rather than Eastern European migrants. He also added in, I want Indian and Australians. Australians, yeah, I mean, they're basically British anyway, so that makes sense. But Indians, because they were part of the empire, therefore they're more English, more able to assimilate than Eastern Europeans, which is, frankly, ridiculous statement. It seems that he's always been a globalist who's always wanted Brexit for his own reasons, which was basically to open up a mass market of labour to the country that it didn't have under EU rules that were in place at the time. And so I just don't think he was ever going to do what we wanted. And the fact that Rupert Lowe was actually our guy in some ways, I mean, he's been accused of being an ethno-nationalist. I mean, maybe he is. I don't think so, though. I think he's just like some people have pointed out, an MLK style old school meritocracy conservative, but he cares about the rules and he cares about the safeguarding of the borders, and he cares about the safeguarding of the people who are already here.
I think Rupert Lowe has a kind of nativist streak in him. I mean, you saw him talking about English identity the other day. Yes. So I think Lowe's, he's not like an insane foaming racist or something, but he understands that these are important issues, I think.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.